Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thank you for joining us for the next installment in our Closer Look series. We're looking behind closed doors and into spaces and projects that you might not otherwise know about at Concordia. And today, we're taking a closer look at the MaSH Lab. But first, to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from Concordia University. We are located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. At Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge, co-creating daily activities that examine research questions, projects, things in development across the university. And there's a note of caution. We're hosting this as a live streamed event from here at Fourth Space and on location. So things can happen. Video and connectivity issues are to be expected, but please stick with us as we show you around. We're also running this event as a live stream Zoom meeting, so anyone joining us via Zoom or those of you here in the space, if you have any questions, raise your hand. We'll try to get a microphone over to you or read out your questions via the chat. And I can see that our team is doing a little connectivity troubleshooting, but that's okay. In the meantime, I'd like to introduce our tour. Are we there? There we go. Dr. Miranda Smitheram is both an artist and design researcher and also an associate professor of material futures, the co-director of the Textiles and Materiality Research Cluster, and the director of the MaSH Lab, showing us around today. But joining her also, special guest Lucy Gill, interdisciplinary artist that works in sculpture and painting. She's joining us today as part of an experiential learning project that connects labs with a current art history course considering materials and processes. So we have both of you here today. And thank you for joining us and showing us around. Can you just tell us, Miranda, where are we today?
Yeah, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for the introduction. Today we're in Milieux. We're on the 10th floor. So Milieux is the Institute for Arts, Culture and Technology in the Faculty of Fine Arts. And we're at the door of MaSH Lab, which is a research creation infrastructure and sort of interstitial wet lab space within Milieux.
Can I ask what MaSH stands for? Is that an acronym?
It is. It is. I like assonance and alliteration, and MaSH stands for Matter and Sustainable Hybridity. But we do a lot of processes here of remediating material, and a lot of those processes involve mashing, smashing, crushing, pulverizing, grinding, etc. And so that's how the name came about.
Right.
Where I was going. Yeah.
MaSH first.
MaSH. Yeah, maybe you can just start by telling us a little bit of like the overview of what you do here in a broad sense. So like the day-to-day processes that you run through and some of the research that you're covering.
Right. So I'm very fortunate to be director of this wet lab. And the wet lab is open to all researchers in Milieux by sort of submitting a research proposal to know that if we can support the type of research they want to do. I also have a core team of postgraduate researchers and even undergraduate researchers, a Milieux undergraduate research fellow who work here in the lab, and a team of research assistants who work alongside of me on specific two particular research projects. So on any given day, there's a number of processes. Because we work with essentially slow design processes, often there's things that are durational that require taking care of. Like we can see today, there's a whole rust situation that we can talk about, but it needs to be sprayed both to keep it rejuvenating and to keep it activating each day.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So it's these kind of like long and in-depth things that you're taking care of. Maybe you can walk us through kind of like how the project starts, like what the initial research comes from, and then sort of like, I know here we have sort of some some machines that you use? Maybe you can talk about how those come into play.
I can talk about my own research project specifically, and then perhaps the equipment and material in the lab more generally.
Yeah.
So we have this kind of suite of amazing equipment here, who all have different names. We have the crusher, a smasher, a grinder. They have different blades and forms. We only work with botanical material in here, or material that can be regenerated. We don't work with plastics per se, and we don't work with bacterial type processes either, because we do have WMIS certification, but it's not a sterile lab. And that said, it's certainly not a sterile lab because I specifically within my own research work with contaminants, pollutants, and invasive plant species. So we need to be careful about making sure that those things are not kind of getting too loose and wild or infiltrating other works.
Right.
Yeah. So the different grinders and blenders and things we have are all about taking equipments down to a sort of base ingredient. And so with these, we can work with concrete, we can work with seed pods, with bark, with different plant material, and take it down to a sort of finer grade of material. And then we have a sort of series of processes, I guess, where one part is kind of exploring the material properties and potentiality of species such as invasive plants, and being able to kind of look at how we could remediate them to become perhaps useful or artistic explorations of what sustainable futures could be. So,
Miranda, sorry,
yes.
I had a question for you.
Go
You
for it.
were showing some of the machinery off to the side, and because you're kind of exploring materials, but you must be using. Well, I don't know. Are you using equipment then that is from other industries, or how do you sort of choose what types of equipment? The grinders, the smashers,
That's
the
a good
mashers.
question. I mean, I'd have to say I'm super well supported by Mark Milieux, who's the head of infrastructure at Milieux. So he has a wealth of knowledge about equipment and setting up labs, and he's been really instrumental in working with me to set up the space here and helping sort of figure out what equipment we need. And it's super funny because as in many labs, often, there can be all these very complicated kind of pieces of machinery with different adaptations. And then something like this, which is literally just a smasher, is probably one of the most important pieces of equipment. And I think that's used for breaking up gravel. So that probably comes from, from that kind of level of industry. So, and some of these would be food grade equipment. So they would be used in manufacturing, for developing flour, things like that. Yeah.
Okay,
So
great.
With the materials that you're working with, where are you sourcing them from? What's the kind of process because you're talking about invasive plants, seeds, kind of like concrete, stuff like that.
Yeah.
What's your, where does it come from for you?
So as I mentioned, in my own particular research creation project, which is a FRQ FC funded research called Ontologies of Kinship, in that, we're working on a particular place, Ile Saint-Helene, and we're looking at it as a contested space that's considered an artificial island, yet it's still, of course, unceded territory. And we're working there primarily through working with principles from my past research in Mātauranga Māori and place-based longitudinal research from an Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing. And so I'm applying those theories and seeing if I can work with invasives through those approaches that I know. And so we're primarily working, as I mentioned, with invasives but also contaminants like rust. And we have a lot of rust and metal that we've discovered that probably remnants, we suspect, from World Expo 67. So we find that sort of buried in unofficial rubbish dumps in the forest on Île Saint-Hélène.
Wow. So is that what we're looking at here?
Yeah, it is, but actually it's all on the table at the moment, rusting into fabric. All the little pieces of rust, including a couple of big poles that we're working with here. And then with my research team, they're all working with different materials.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Oh. So this is 2 posts, a fencing post, and then some very old, it's totally wrapped in silk, so you can't see it, but a very old pole, and that's gradually rusting onto this fabric. And we're just exploring purely the materiality of rust as a kind of evidential material of late stage capitalism, of something that we no longer value and is discarded but still remains, and seeing how we can extrapolate from that material research creation fabric that can be used to kind of bring up those conversations around what happens to the life of materials after they're no longer deemed valuable.
Yeah. It's amazing to see the kind of like translation from these raw materials here into the like stains of it as a kind of like language, which I find
I really enjoy that. And I think, you know, the materials that we work with here by design, because we're following pathways of materiality, are generally sustainable or circular. So another of my research students is working primarily with mussel shells and oyster shells. So she's collecting those from discarded restaurant waste. And she's looking at developing biocomposite material with those shells.
Great. Do you have any other examples here that we could take a look at of like little samples or?
Yeah, so these are all works in progress, and most of them are very sort of prototypical. So we're testing often. It's a very much a kind of long game. These ones are working with different invasive plant species as dyes and inks, and also rust, and looking at the interaction and intersection of those materials together. Rust, when it encounters botanical pigments, it has this process that's known as like saddening, where it changes the pH level of the color and dulls it to a different kind of shade, which I think is kind of interesting. We also have these little series of embroidered prototypes here of little islands that we're working on with the Tajima digital embroidery machine in textile materiality. And these little pockets are filled with a different substrate and natural wool, and will eventually be used to propagate seeds that sort of grow through the material. And the inks that they're dyed with, again, from the invasive plant species that we're working with.
What are these kind of like crystal looking ones over here?
Yeah, so I've worked with sea salt crystals in the past when I had a 2-year research project that was based on a beach in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I guess the obsession with crystallizing things kind of stuck with me. But I learned something interesting about how crystals are used in different fields of medicine to sequester or kind of contain pollutants or toxins in that sense. And so I was wondering if it would work in a similar strategy to sequester different pollutants. So here it's working with polluted water, and here it's working with charcoal. So again, this kind of speculative objects, but and little tests for bigger research.
So the crystallization process is actually like sucking up and holding those pollutants.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And yeah, definitely. And I'm always sort of looking at the ideas, I guess, of scaffolds because of the material approach of working with materials that are in relationship with each other and seeing how that manifests through a kind of textile architecture. So yeah, starting to kind of think about how those things can be applied in a sense and grow or develop on a base. Yeah.
Do you maybe have any other examples? I see this kind of like drawing rack up here. It's always interesting to see the different areas of the lab, what's going on there.
So here we have a lot of bioplastic and biocomposite samples. These are developed with my research assistants, and in these we're looking at the properties of things. So any one material that we kind of engage with, we get to know on a really deep level. Like we spend a lot of time doing observation, drawing, sketching the different species. And then once we eventually start working with it as matter, we're looking at how it wants to behave. So what does it want to do? We don't try and sort of force a material into something that it doesn't have the propensity for. So in these, we're working with buckthorn, these green ones, and developing bioplastics. These are becoming an art material that will be part of a bigger work. Here it's working with the fibrous qualities of the phragmite. And again, with the different equipment and materials, we generally try and look at all the different parts of a plant species and sort of isolate them to see how they behave and what different properties they have.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay. It seems that materials come into the MaSH lab, and then they start undergoing so many different processes. They become almost a different material, I don't know, every day or over time. Do you take measures, or are you developing measures in order to document these, in order to create almost like a materials library of something that's constantly changing states?
Yeah, we do a bit of that in previous projects, like this one here. This is an open source cookbook where we sort of documented the different bioplastics research we were doing. That's an open source material and will be in the Concordia Library, I hope, at some point soon. We do a lot of observational work with each species, because something really fantastic that took me a while to kind of come into understanding, and something I really like to share with my undergraduate students in teaching and both my graduate students in research, is when you're working with nature and when you're working with environment and when you're deliberately seeking to work from a anti-colonial, non-extractive perspective, you have to come to accept the aesthetics of change and decay and as being part of a process. So we talk about some colors from nature being being fragile or fugitive, and that they aren't designed to last permanently, that they will themselves alter. And likewise, the bioplastics are relatively stable, but we do accept that everything can ultimately be melted back into base matter, and that part of its beauty is its impermanence, and part of its beauty is also being brought into that appreciation of that in nature. Everything grows, everything flourishes, everything dies, everything decays and gives back nutrients, and the cycle continues.
The way that you're describing it sounds also very like seasonal, which I think you spoke about before, which is that you kind of have to maybe work that way also?
Exactly. Yeah, so that this is why you see us working with rust at the because it's winter.
Mhm.
And I'll show you our
Yeah,
fridge,
please.
which is a bit of a mess at the moment. And it's a bit of a winter. So during summertime, that's into the things because
Seems like we lost you, Force Space team. We'll just hold up for a second. Oh, you're back.
No, we're not, but it's okay. You keep talking.
Should I keep talking? Yeah. So in summertime, yeah, our fridge is like bursting at the seams because we're harvesting, through ethical foraging from wasteland, etc., around the island of Montreal, and developing some things want to be color. So some plant species lend themselves really well to becoming color, and so we develop pigments, which are up here. So this is one process of developing things into a powder form, which takes about a week to kind of coax the color chemical compound from a plant material through a really sort of repetitive filtration kind of process and breaking it down. And then in the fridge, we saw a couple of different versions of things from inks. We develop a lot of inks. This is Phragmites australis, my favorite invasive plant species at the moment. Not that you like to pick a favorite. Here we see dandelion ink, and this one is from, I think, the flowers. We also made dandelion ink from the leaves and from the root system. That gave a really subtle different color. And then dyes. So this is buckthorn berry dye. It's not looking very nice at this end of winter. Yeah.
Amazing. So a lot of the inks that we see in the fridge and dyes, also you take them and put them into a powder format. It's like the same plants, or
No, some will and some won't.
Okay.
And I'm still sort of discovering why, but some will not be able to go through that process, and the color will not be released in that way. But through a dye process, they will. Yeah. Yeah.
I think we spoke before, you have some collaborations that you do with either other labs in the school or other universities also. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So there's sort of a number of things that happen because MaSH Lab is interstitial. It's open to research on short-term projects from any researchers throughout Milieux. So for instance, we've had Hannah Klaus from Studio Arts, who's co-director of Indigenous Futures Research Centre. She worked in here with the research assistants on dyeing with sumac. We had a great time with that. There were a lot of ladybirds involved, which we saved. It's okay. But that was all sumac that they were harvesting from Ganawage and working with to create dye material for an exhibition work. We also host workshops in here on a regular ongoing basis, and we have an upcoming one, a community dye bath series that we're going to kind of run throughout the rest of winter and into sort of spring when there's not much happening. So we've got different plant materials that we'll work with in the community dye bath that anyone, Milieux research members are welcome to come along and bring a piece of cloth or material that's already sort of worn and dye it with a plant and have a chat about plants.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Miranda. Thank you, Lucy. I think one of the heartbreaking parts of these lab walks, at least for me over here, is that we kind of feel like we're just beginning, that there's so much more that we don't get to see. But I would still want to thank you both for showing us around, Lucy, for your questions, but Miranda really letting us in to your lab, letting us take a closer look. Also mentioned that, Miranda, you were here a couple weeks ago as part of the Indigenous Futures Research Center Symposium, and you gave a really great talk talking about the background of the work happening in Il Saint-Alain. So I definitely recommend people check that out. Okay,
Great.
we're going to wrap up things from here, but just want to let everyone know we're closing up the live stream, but this tour remains available on our YouTube channel, and you should revisit it.